You are now getting ready for bed. Donned in your sleep clothes, you are all comfy with your head nestled on a pillow. You are eager to have a good night's sleep. You may now turn off the light and let us begin our bedtime story. This is a fictional narrative, though based mostly from a historical account. The title of tonight's reading is The Unlikely Warrior. The sun had just descended beyond the horizon. Magenta streaks splashed across the indigo backdrop, and only a hint of yellow and orange as evidence of where it once sat could be observed. The arid hot afternoon air had begun to shift, causing a chill up a shepherd boy's spine. He had been strumming celestial tunes skillfully on his wooden harp to relax himself after he had a thunderbolt experience grabbing a young lion's mane and striking it as it went after his prized sheep earlier. No one, not a beast or human, could harm his flock. He would make certain to destroy any species who would dare frighten or bring terror upon them. His heart was committed to their keeping, that he had practiced endlessly running the plains, climbing rocks and mountains, throwing and hitting goals and targets with stones, using his slingshot, and even honing tactics of evasion and traps against bears and lions to keep himself fit and be truly worthy of being a good protector of the ewes and lambs under his care. He rounded the herd of fluffy creatures back down the hill to their pen, guiding them with a staff in his hand. How precious each one were to him! He had exactly 64 of them, and he knew them all by name. Shofar was a sheep who had earned the title because of his seemingly extended nose. He was the one who had almost been harmed had he not been keen enough to spot the beast as he was about to launch an attack on the unsuspecting. Shofar would have been a casualty like the 5 he lost when he was just a new shepherd. Sheep were dumb creatures, and they could go easily astray. Shofar had wandered too far, chasing a rainbow butterfly, separating him from the rest where they were grazing close to each other. David vowed to never let his guard down. Within a few years of sheer determination and an implicit trust in someone greater than he had been able to follow through with his commitment. The young shepherd was just about to head for home when he heard his name being called excitedly. "David, David, come quickly. Father has asked me to fetch you." A light-haired older lad ran up to meet him. "The prophet Samuel is here. We have all been summoned, as he has come to anoint one of us. Unfortunately, not even Eliab, Abinadab, Shammah, nor I or our other brothers have been chosen." David immediately ran as fast as his feet could take him, for he had long wanted to meet the renowned prophet of Israel. Yet he was baffled. Who was being chosen for what? Just before his brother could give an answer, David disappeared under the tent where his father and other brothers were all gathered in the large dome, talking excitedly. "Here he is at last, my youngest son, beautiful and ruddy, a good shepherd and harpist too." Jesse, a stout old man with a full gray beard, exclaimed proudly, "Prophet Samuel, this is my youngest son, David," he introduced with a jovial expression on his face. It had not been so earlier. He was appalled that amongst all his older sons, not one was chosen by God through his human messenger. The seer had corrected him when he explained that God does not look at a man's rank or age or appearance, but that he always looked at the heart. "Yes, this is he," "He is surely the one." The prophet smiled approvingly. "He is to be anointed King of Israel." "King of what? Me?" David was surprised and felt so humbled by the revelation. "Yes, you, David, are to be king." The old sage had a gleam in his eye. "Surely the Lord God has chosen you among the tribes of Israel, and you are going to ascend the throne in his appointed time." David could hardly believe his ears. His heart welled up with praise and gratitude to the one he often spoke to and addressed as his heavenly Father. He felt so small compared to the promise which loomed large, like a surreal, magnanimous gift. It made him bow low. Samuel then poured a vial of golden oil upon David as he knelt in awe before his God. That wondrous day was forever etched in the young man's heart. He believed with all his might that God would not slack with his pledge. If there was one thing the boy was convinced of, it was that God was and always will be faithful. David rested in security that what had been declared shall be one right day. As the days passed after that special and private ceremony, nothing had changed though in the matter of home and business responsibilities, ranks, or sense of importance. David still continued with tending the flocks until one afternoon he was summoned to the palace to minister as royal minstrel to Saul, who had been plagued with a disturbing spirit. David skillfully played his melodramatic tunes that had not failed to soothe his soul in the fields, nor now the king's, when his tantrums arose. Saul loved the young lad. He was the only one who could calm him down. The boy was essential to his sanity, for he was able to bring him serenity whenever David would skillfully pluck his instrument. So it was that David would tend his father's sheep by day and hurry to the palace near dusk to play for the king. Soon, talk of war stirred the Hebrew people. The Philistine army had gathered at Succoth in Judah, ready to launch an attack on the tribal nation. His 3 older brothers were drafted into the army. David wanted to join them, but was deemed too young to be an official soldier yet. He had dreamed of being a warrior all his life. As King Saul's armor-bearer, he marveled at the instruments of the battle displayed at the royal armory. He would gingerly touch each gold breastplate, spear, and javelin, and would taste the scenes of war and victory in his mind. It was this ambition that caused David to be ecstatic when his father asked him to go down to the valley of Elah, where the Israeli army had set up camp. He was to deliver grains and loaves of bread to his older brothers, and cheeses to their captain. David was eager to watch the fight up close, so he did not waste any moment to do as he was asked. The sound of drums beating, the jostling of swords, a cacophony of a couple of weightlifters' grunts could be heard as he neared the camp. He could feel his blood rising in excitement. He immediately noticed Aminadab's form as he came out of a tent. "Hey, brother, look what I got." Hey, look who's here." He grabbed David by the neck and disheveled his hair. David tried to compose himself and hastily straightened his locks, knowing that the gesture was his older brother's show of affection towards him. "Hey, how's the battle? So who's winning?" "I'm certain we are," David sneered triumphantly. Just at that moment, an ominous, deep, and loud voice pervaded the atmosphere. "Why are you such cowards, Israel? Who will come to fight me? You are as weak as your God is. Hail to our Dagon! He arms me with strength, and not one of you can strike me dead. I challenge you. Challenge me, and if I lose, we will stop the war against you. But if you lose, We shall charge upon all of you, and you become our slaves." Abinadab's blood seemed to have drained from his face. "Goliath, Gath's giant, has been challenging us for days. He is just too tall and large, like a fortified tower. No one has had strength enough to face him," he stammered in fright. A thunderous sound of men fleeing erupted as hundreds of Israeli soldiers entered the camp. David was appalled. What shall be done to the man who kills the Philistine? How dare he challenge the living God and his armies? A man nearby answered, "The king has promised to enrich any man who would fight Goliath, and has pledged his own daughter as his wife, and yet we could not muster strength to face that monster." He shook his head in defeat. Everyone else agreed in a chorus. David's anger rose from within him. He had not expected cowardice from their camp. Had not God been faithful to deliver? Why were the people so faithless? "I will fight this uncircumcised Philistine, this Goliath. He shall not taunt our God or any of us, his people. We belong to a great God, and we serve the King of heaven's armies. I shall defeat him," he shouted. Eliab, David's older brother, heard the commotion and had drawn closer, just in time to hear his younger brother's words, and he burned with indignation against David. "You are filled with pride, David. How dare you say you could defeat this ogre? No, not one has been able to come up against this giant. You are young and full of arrogance." He spit on the ground in both frustration and disgust. David was undaunted, in spite of the discouragements from the men and his own brothers. When Saul was told that David had volunteered to face the giant, the boy came up to the king to pledge his allegiance, and he was accepted, though reluctantly, for Saul himself had grown weary from the tauntings coming from the opposite camp. David had reiterated his many accounts of his duels, fighting dangerous beasts while shepherding his flock, that it had nearly convinced the monarch they could win. Though still plagued with doubts, Saul then resigned the eager lad to the task. He was just relieved that someone was even bold enough to take on the opposition. The morning air had an excitement to it. Both camps had all gone down to the valley to witness the unlikely duel, and each readied for the battle that might ensue from the aftermath of the contest. David had taken off the heavy armor which was put on him. He instead wore his simple linen garb, encircled a band on his head, and took his slingshot. He gathered a couple of smooth pebbles and placed them in a small bag, then tied it around his waist. The plains were hot and dusty, in spite that it was still far from noonday. The Philistine camp were rowdy, and the men abusive in their language, as they taunted the armies of Israel. "You dare insult me with a young boy to come fight me," a large human being overshadowed the crowd. Everyone were hushed, and a sense of foreboding enveloped young and old at the plains that day. Goliath was clad in full armor. His breastplate shone brightly. The sword in his hand glimmered with weight and sharpness. His feet were shod with army sandals, tied with strings of fine leather. He stood unabashed, and his countenance was fierce. "You are just a cricket, a mouse to a behemoth. You are just like your God, small and incapable," Goliath mocked. David was not to be outdone. "You may look like a mighty foe, Goliath, but you are nothing to the God we serve. You come to me with spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord our God." He shouted and hailed a stone in his sling and hurled it upon the charging giant. Without even a fight, the giant fell head down. David had struck a fatal blow on his opponent's skull. It all happened so fast that everyone seemed paralyzed. David immediately took Goliath's sword and drew it on his slain enemy's head. Then, as after a shock, the Philistine army fled, screaming in horror and in disbelief that their Goliath had not even been able to lift a hand to strike. How had he suddenly come crashing down like a great and mighty mountain leveled by an earthquake to the ground? They were all perplexed, and fear gripped their hearts. On the other hand, shouts of victory resounded on the Israeli side. Everyone rushed to hug and embrace their victor, proud that the weak had slain the strong. Everyone's faith were rekindled, and David was jubilant that their great God had been lifted up and shown as truly almighty. His brothers Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah were repentant of their unbelief. Unabashedly, they too expressed their admiration of their little brother's courage and publicly flaunted him to everyone that day. We have now reached the end of our story. Good night and sleep tight.